There are certain attributes that are known as sifatul kamal. These are the attributes of perfectness. If a person, anyone, does not have these things, there is something wrong in this person's life. Something is missing in this person's life. There are some other attributes. If a person will have those, this person is doing greater than others. But there are certain attributes, if a person doesn't have them, which means there is a defect. It's not only if you have them you are getting better. If you don't have them, then there is a defect. To having them, it's a sign of being at least in shape, in proper shape. There are 7 of these attributes that are known as sifatul kamal. These are the attributes of being perfect. Without it, there will be defect. And of course, no one is more perfect than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is free of all defect. All the other attributes are there, but these attributes are in their most perfect way in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if any other creature has any signs of these attributes, it will be very minimum. It's only the perfectness is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let us just go through all of these 7 so we have some basic knowledge about these attributes. One of them is hayat, life. A person, something that doesn't have no life is a defect. Human being lost their life. One of the major defects. Of course, if a person will have half of this body doesn't function, is a major defect. Imagine if the person doesn't have no life at all. It's a dead body. Hayat, which means life, is one of the very important attributes that a person should have. And if anyone does not have that attribute, then it's a sign of having a major defect. So anything that has hayat and loses the hayat, has life, loses the life, it's a major defect. That lost something very important. If we lose this hayat partially from some parts of our body, this becomes a defect in that body, in that part of the body. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hayat, of course, is totally different than the hayat and the life of any other creature. Because He always had it, He will never lose it, and there are no ups and downs in His hayat. Every other creature loses its life. Everyone is going to die someday. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never lose this attribute of His. So hayat is one of the main attributes that are considered to be the attributes of being perfect, and it has to be there always for a person to be perfect. And we can see one of our major defect and weakness is that if a person lives the best life in the world, the best life, health, wealth, needs, luxuries, whatever you can think about, we live the best life. At the end, we know that this person has to leave this world. So if everything else becomes in the most perfect form, but finally there has to be an end to it, and to this beauty, and to this health, and to this wealth, and in simple words, and to this life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no end. Al-awwal al-akhir. The second attribute is of ilm, knowledge. Not knowing something, of course, is our shortcoming. If we have the ability of knowing everything, we will try to do it. And whenever a person knows something about a field, we feel so proud that, look, I'm so knowledgeable about this, where others have no knowledge about it. So ilm is one of the attributes of al-kamal, of being perfect, and any loss, any thing that is not there from the attribute of ilm, this shows that there is some defect. So I have knowledge in my field, but of course I don't have no knowledge about other fields. And of course that's a defect in me, that although I'm perfect in my field, but in other fields, very simply you can say that this person is jahil about that field. Even if I'm considered alim in my field, knowledgeable in my field, I'm jahil in the field of medicine. I'm jahil in the field of the law of the country. I'm jahil in the field of constructions. There are many more fields in the world that I'm jahil about. So my ilm is very limited. There can be 100 people in this room and they all will have some ilm about something where I'm jahil about that field. And it's the same for all of us. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah used to say that one of the great signs of the virtue of ilm, of the virtue of knowing something, is when you call someone jahil in a field that he doesn't know nothing about, but you call him jahil, he feels offended. No one would like to be called jahil. If I know just 2 or 3 things about your field, and you are a nice and humble person, and I talk about, you're a doctor, and I talk about medicine, and I tell you 2, 3 things about medicine, and you tell me, mashallah, your knowledge is very great about medicine. See how proud I feel of myself that look, a doctor is telling me that I'm very knowledgeable about his field. Whereas, all I know is about just these 2, 3 things. And his knowledge is much greater than me in that field. So see, when we are told that you are very knowledgeable, we feel proud. This is to tell us that ilm, having knowledge, is a sign of perfectness, and not having it is a defect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now we can understand that if Allah is free from defect, simply means there is no ilm in the world, no knowledge in the world that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't know it. He has the ilm of each and everything. And we will talk about in more detail about his ilm inshallah. But after we finish talking about these 7 attributes that are known to be the attributes of kamal, of perfectness. The third thing is qudrah, which means power over doing something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, nothing is out of his power. And for any person to have power over something is something, it shows that this person is a good person, has full ability of doing this thing. And not having power over doing something that the person needs to be done is a defect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He had the power over creating the universe. Now He has the power over keeping it and taking it. So His power never reduces. Now when we look at the ayah of Surah Wash-Shamsi wa Duhaha, last ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about destroying some of the nations. Then He says, فَدَمْدَمَ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ بِذَنْبِهِمْ فَسَوَّاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His punishments, destroyed all of them. وَلَا يَخَافُ عُقْبَهَا. He is not afraid of the consequences, that what people would do to me after this. Full qudrah over everything that He would like to do. The fourth is sama', which means to hear. Any defect in hearing, the person who cannot hear properly or cannot hear, this is a defect in that person's quality of perfection, which means not a perfect human being, is not a perfect person who cannot hear. And since this attribute inshallah is going to be coming further down in this hadith that we are talking about, 99 names of Allah, we'll talk in more detail about it. But we need to realize that the sama', which means the power of hearing, will be considered a good quality and a perfect quality if he can hear everything at all times. If hearing me prevents him from hearing you, and hearing both of us prevents him from hearing a third person, this is a defect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free of defect. This is to make us realize and understand that nothing prevents Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from hearing anything in this world. So He hears each and every sound that takes place anywhere in the universe. Basar, seen. Because blindness is a defect. Or having a weak vision is defect. We feel that having glasses is a sign of beauty, but it's a sign of defect. that the eyesight is weak. So, having basar, seeing, is of course is a quality of being perfect. And of course, with the perfect eyesight that we would have, still there are so many defects there. We can't see behind the wall. We can't see in the darkness. We can't see when the eyes are not healthy. And there are so many things that are stopping us from seeing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's basar, seeing, is such that seeing one thing doesn't prevent him from seeing another thing. Seeing at one situation doesn't prevent him from seeing in another situation. He sees all things at all times. Nothing is away from his vision. He sees everything at all times. Number 6, Mashi'ah. Mashi'ah, or you can call it irada, which means to have the power over doing one thing once he has decided to do it. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudra of keeping the universe and destroying the universe, both are there. This is qudra. Now, what will decide? Does he have power over doing one thing over other? Is his power over keeping the world is greater than the power on destroying the world? Or his power on destroying the world is greater than the power of keeping it? No. This will be a defect in either side. For us, this may be the case, that doing one thing, we have the power, even if we have power over doing certain things, but sometimes one thing is easier than others. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing we can say is easier than that, because easier means the other is a little more difficult. And that thing doesn't exist in that dictionary. So both are extremely easy and kun fayakun. Now, since both things are possible for him and they are within his power, so then through his irada, his will, we may translate as will, through his will, then he does one of the two things. Qudra is over both. But then the irada, through the irada, he would do one of the two. So irada, which means the power of having the will of doing something. And then through that will, the person does something. We may have a will of doing a lot of things. We wish to do this, this, this and that, but we cannot do all of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's irada and mashi'ah is such that whenever he wills to do something, he just does it. And through his will, he does one of the two things that are within his qudra. So we need to realize the difference. Qudra is the power over it, but I have the power, I'm not doing anything right now. Once I would do it, that simply means my irada, my will was to do this. On the other hand, did it happen without my will? Nothing happens without his irada. So this is irada. So everything, whatever happens is in the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the mashi'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wills to do this, then that thing happens. And number 7, kalam. The power to speak. The power of speech. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, if a human being is dumb, cannot speak, it's a defect in a human being. If you can speak one language and not the other language, when you go to that country, you will feel that you are left out. We can speak some letters, we cannot pronunciate some other letters properly. It's a defect in a person, that he cannot pronounce these letters. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's kalam is such that he doesn't need a tongue to speak. He doesn't need anything to speak. How does he speak? That's his ilm, wallahu a'lam. How does he see? It's in his ilm. It's out of our ilm. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's kalam is something that is totally different than our kalam, but he has the power to speak. Otherwise, if a person is not able to speak, it's a defect. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from defect. So these are 7 attributes that are called sifatul kamal, the 7 attributes of perfectness. And if a person does not have any of these, then there is a defect in that person. If a person has any of these or all of these, and whatever he's missing from these, any portion of it that person is missing out of it, he has that much defect in that field. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all of these 7 attributes in its most perfect way. This is part of our ilm about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and about our iman about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep in mind, if we go back to the history and look at most of the groups that deviated from Islam, and many of those who even fell into kufr and shirk wal a'yazu billah, mostly you will see that they had a wrong belief about one of these 7 attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Most of the firaq, most of the groups that deviated from Islam, they had misunderstandings, they had wrong beliefs about one of these attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, when during the time of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullahi alayhi, the problem of Quran, Kalamullah, this topic came up. There were people who said, no, Quran is makhlooq, is created by Allah, is not Kalamullah. Kalamullah, the words of Allah are eternal, His attributes are eternal. So there is no beginning, no end to it. And they thought Quran is makhlooq, which means has beginning and end to it, and it will destroy one day. Same thing when kuffar, they worship idols and they worshipped it in the past, and even now, when we see those people who worship objects beside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't worship these objects thinking that these objects will do everything for us. But they are made to believe that these objects will connect us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will have a better connection to Allah with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through these idols, through this fire, through these objects. Why? The main theme behind it is, if all the world is talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at once, then I don't know how much He would hear me. If the whole world is presenting their need to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at once, I don't know how can He fulfill it. Qudrah, see? Idol worshipping, starting from there to most of the other minor groups that deviate from the right track, the main problem with those is their iman in one of these attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is why these are very important attributes that we must have proper iman in it, have the right understanding about it, and then we will talk about the benefits of them, as inshallah we'll go to each of these attributes as the time will come.